End it now.
They found her in the snow, barely alive, wrapped in nothing but a filthy, torn blanket that clung to her skin like a shroud. The Montana wind screamed through the pines, whipping ice across the frozen ground, but she could not move. Her bare shoulders were purple from the cold, her thighs marked with bruises that told of cruelty long before the storm ever touched her. She was only 23, yet in that moment, she looked like a broken doll, abandoned by the world. Ethan Crowley had seen harsh winters before. At 54, he had buried cattle by the dozens, watched neighbors freeze where they stood, and carried the silence of too many storms inside his chest. But he had never seen anything like this. A young woman left to die on his land, tossed away as if her life meant less than a coin. Ethan was not a man who sought company. For years, he had lived alone in his cabin, away from townsfolk who whispered about his strange ways. Yet something in the way her lips trembled, in the faint rise and fall of her chest, cut through the ice that had hardened his heart. He knelt beside her. Her skin burned with cold, a cruel paradox that told him time was nearly gone. He lifted her into his arms. The blanket fell open for a moment, revealing skin marred by frostbite and ropes that had left angry red marks around her wrists. Whoever had done this to her had meant for her to suffer. Inside the cabin, the fire snapped and hissed, throwing long shadows across the wooden walls. Ethan laid her on the cot closest to the hearth and poured whiskey into a tin cup. He pressed the liquid to her lips, coaxing life back into her. She gasped weakly, a sound both fragile and defiant, and for the first time, Ethan realized she was not ready to surrender. Outside, the blizzard roared on, but inside that cabin, something else stirred. A question he could not shake, and one she was too weak to answer. Who had wanted this girl dead, and why did they choose his land to bury her in snow? Morning crept into the cabin, slow and gray, the kind of light that never warmed a thing. Abigail stirred beneath the blanket Ethan had thrown over her. Her lips were cracked, her eyes swollen, but she was alive. For a while, she just lay there, staring at the wooden beams above her, as if she did not believe she had survived the night. Ethan poured coffee into a tin cup and set it on the table. He did not ask questions. Not yet. Out here, a man learned patience. You let the fire thaw a body before you forced a story from them. Still, the questions burned in his chest. Who left her like that? And what kind of debt would follow? When her voice finally came, it was soft, almost ashamed. She told him her name, Abigail. She said it quick, like the word itself might betray her. Then, piece by piece, the truth began to bleed out. She was not just some stray girl. She was the illegitimate daughter of a wealthy landowner raised in shadows, tolerated only because she could be used. And when she came of age, her family had chosen her fate. They planned to marry her off to an older man, rich, cruel, a man with a history every ranch hand in the county whispered about. Abigail had refused, not in silence, not with meek tears, but in front of her family, in front of the man himself. She had looked them in the eyes and said she would rather die in the snow than be his wife. And for that, her family made sure she got her wish. They sent her into the blizzard with nothing but a dirty blanket, hoping the storm would finish the job. Ethan listened, the firelight flickering across his face. He had no words, only the heavy silence of a man who knew cruelty all too well. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, as if reminding them the world beyond was still hunting. Abigail closed her eyes and whispered almost to herself, that death might have been kinder than what waited if those men came back. Ethan did not answer, but he knew what she did not. Men like that never left a debt unfinished. By the third day, Abigail was strong enough to stand at the window, watching snow pile up against the barn. She kept her arms wrapped tight around herself, not from the cold, but from the feeling that eyes were still on her. Ethan said little, only tended the fire and sharpened his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. That morning, he stepped outside to split wood and stopped dead. Boot tracks, fresh ones, too wide to be his, too deep to belong to a hunter passing through. The trail led straight toward the cabin before turning back into the timber. Ethan's jaw tightened. By noon, the visitors came. 3 men on horseback, faces red from the cold, grin sharp as broken glass. Abigail froze the second she saw them. They were the same men who had dragged her into the storm. Well, look at that. One of them jeered. The little bird didn't freeze after all. Ethan stood on the porch, hands loose at his sides. "This is my land," he said flatly. "You've got no business here." The tallest of the 3 leaned forward in his saddle. "That girl belongs to us. Her family owes, and she's worth more than you'll ever scrape together. Hand her over. Or maybe we work out a deal. Cash for silence." The tension was thick enough to cut. Abigail gripped the windowsill, fighting the urge to scream. Ethan did not flinch. He simply stared until the grins on their faces faded into curses. Finally, with a spit in the snow, the men yanked their reins and rode off, but not before promising they would be back. Inside, Abigail's hands shook. She whispered that running might be safer than waiting. Ethan only shook his head. Running never saves you. It just tells them where to hunt. The fire popped outside. The tracks of those horses sank deeper into the snow, a reminder that danger had only paused, not passed. And you listening now, tell me this. If 3 armed men came for someone on your land, would you fight them off or hand her over to save your own skin? If you want to know what Ethan did next, stay close to this story and make sure you subscribe so you do not miss what comes after, because the next time those men came back, they did not come to bargain. They came to take blood. The men did not wait long. By the next moonless night, they returned, 3 shadows on horseback, their laughter cutting through the wind like knives. Abigail heard it first, the crunch of hooves on frozen ground. She grabbed the knife from the table, her fingers trembling, but her eyes set hard. Ethan opened the door before they could knock. The cold rushed in, along with the stench of whiskey and gunpowder. The tallest one grinned, showing teeth yellowed by tobacco. "We gave you a chance, old man. Hand her over or buy her freedom. We ain't asking again." Abigail stepped forward before Ethan could answer. The knife shook in her hand, but her voice did not. "You will not take me." For a moment, the cabin was silent. Then the men burst out laughing. One of them spat in the snow. "Look at that. The bird thinks she has claws." Ethan's eyes narrowed. He reached for the old bone horn hanging by the door, a relic from years ago when he had stumbled on a den of half-starved wolf pups. He raised it to his lips and blew. The sound was low, mournful, carrying into the black timber. At first there was nothing. Then the forest answered. Dozens of eyes flickered in the dark, yellow and unblinking. A growl rolled through the snow like distant thunder. The men stiffened. One drew his pistol, but his hand shook. The first wolf broke from the trees, a massive gray shape, teeth glinting white. Then another, and another. They did not attack, not yet. But they circled, shoulders low, tails stiff. Ethan stepped down from the porch, the horn still in his hand. This is my land. The girl stays. The next time you ride here, the snow will cover your bones. The men cursed, scrambled for their horses, and fled into the night. Their tracks disappeared fast in the falling snow. But the fear they left behind clung heavier than the storm. Abigail lowered the knife, her body trembling now that the danger had passed. She turned to Ethan, her voice barely more than a whisper. What are they going to do next? And that, my friend, is the question you should be asking too. Because when men run scared, they do not stay gone for long. When the riders vanished into the storm, silence fell heavy around the cabin. The wolves melted back into the trees, leaving only their prints in the snow. But that night, when the wolves faded back into the trees, something even more powerful stayed inside the cabin. Inside, the fire burned low, stronger. Ethan poured her another cup of broth. And for a moment, they sat in quiet. The kind of quiet that did not feel like punishment anymore. Abigail finally spoke. All my life, they told me I was nothing. A mistake. Tonight, I stood in front of them, and I did not run. Her voice cracked, but the words held steady. Ethan looked at her, the lines of his weathered face softening. That is what they fear most. Not the wolves, not me. They fear you remembering your worth. For the first time since she had stumbled into his land, Abigail smiled. It was small, tired, but real. She was no longer the girl tossed into the snow to die. She was a woman who had faced the storm and still drawn breath. And maybe that is the lesson hidden in the cold. That no matter what family says, no matter what the world decides, a person is not defined by the weight others put on them. A person is defined by the moment they stand up and say, I am still here. Think about it. If you were Abigail, would you have had the courage to defy your family and risk everything for freedom? Or would you have bent your head and lived in chains? And if you were Ethan, would you have stood your ground against armed men, or handed her over to keep your peace? Stories like this remind us that dignity is worth fighting for, even in the harshest winter. If you believe that too, give this story a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And make sure you subscribe so you will be here when the next tale of the West comes riding through. Because the storms will always come.